The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the world outside Jong Suk's mansion slick and gleaming under the streetlights. The estate felt quieter than usual, too quiet. Samantha paced the length of her gilded room, every nerve on edge. She hated the stillness, hated the feeling of being watched even when no one was there. She wanted air, freedom. She told herself she would only take a short walk down the hall, just to stretch her legs. Nothing more. The guard stationed outside her door gave her a sharp look as she stepped into the hallway. "Stay close," he warned in clipped English. She ignored him. The corridors were a labyrinth of polished wood, dim lighting, and hushed footsteps echoing faintly from distant rooms. She tried not to think about what business was being conducted behind those closed doors. But curiosity burned hotter than fear. When she reached a corner where the hall split, she hesitated. One direction led back toward the grand dining area. The other dipped into a quieter wing of the mansion, one she hadn't seen before. The guard behind her shifted. "Miss Blake's." She forced a smile over her shoulder. "Just looking. Don't worry." He grunted but stayed back, his footsteps heavy. Samantha's pulse quickened as she slipped down the darker hallway, her heels silent against the thick carpet. The air grew colder here, the lighting dimmer. She passed one closed door after another until she heard it, voices. Low, sharp, tense. She stopped. The voices came from a room at the far end of the corridor. The door was cracked, a sliver of golden light spilling into the hallway. Her better judgment screamed at her to turn back. But she didn't. She crept closer, pressing herself against the wall, heart pounding. Through the gap in the door, she saw him. Jong Suk sat at the head of a long table, his posture regal, his expression carved from stone. Around him were several men in dark suits, their faces hard, eyes sharp. Papers and weapons lay scattered across the table. And at the center, kneeling on the floor, hands bound, was another man. His face was bruised, blood trickling from his lip. Samantha's stomach twisted. "Do you think you can steal from me?" Jong Suk's voice was calm, low, yet it carried a weight that silenced the room. "Do you think I wouldn't notice?" The bound man muttered something in Korean, shaking his head furiously. Jong Suk leaned back in his chair, eyes cold. He lifted a hand. One of his men stepped forward. Without hesitation, he struck the kneeling man across the face with the butt of a gun. The crack of impact echoed through the room. Samantha clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her heart thundered. The bound man groaned, blood dripping onto the polished floor. Jong Suk watched, unmoving, his gaze unreadable. Then he rose. Slowly, deliberately, he walked to the trembling man on the floor, crouched, and tilted his chin up with 2 fingers. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Loyalty," he said, "is not optional in my world." The man whimpered, begging in Korean. Samantha didn't understand the words, but the desperation was clear. Jong Suk's eyes softened, just for a moment. And then, with terrifying swiftness, he drew a blade from his jacket and pressed it lightly against the man's throat. Samantha's breath caught. He didn't cut. Not yet. Instead, he spoke softly, almost intimately, as if confiding in the man alone. "This is mercy," he said, "because I could do worse." The man broke down, sobbing. Jong Suk dropped the blade with a casual flick onto the table behind him and straightened, his expression already calm again. He nodded once to his men. "Deal with him." The guards seized the man, dragging him out the back door. His cries echoed until they faded into silence. Samantha's legs trembled violently. She stumbled back from the crack in the door, her stomach churning. She wanted to run, but her body wouldn't move. That was when she felt it. Presence behind her. Slowly, she turned. Jong Suk stood in the hallway, not 3 feet away. Her blood froze. His men were still inside, finishing whatever orders he had given. But he was here watching her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with something sharp and dangerous. "How much?" he asked quietly. "Did you see?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. He stepped closer, his height overwhelming, his aura suffocating. She pressed herself against the wall, breath shallow. "I told you, Samantha," he said, his voice soft as silk, deadly as steel. "My world is not yours." Her chest heaved. "Then why show me?" she whispered. His gaze darkened. "Because you disobeyed. And now you know what happens when people disobey me." Tears stung her eyes. "You're a monster." He leaned in, his lips brushing her ear, his words a dangerous whisper. "Yes," he murmured. "You're still here, that should tell you something." Her whole body shook. She hated him. She feared him. But deep, deep down, something else twisted inside her. Something she refused to name. The rain returned the following night. Samantha sat curled on the edge of her bed, staring out the window at the sheets of water blurring the skyline. Sleep was impossible. Her mind replayed what she had seen. Jong-suk's blade glinting, the man's cries, the cold finality of his command. He's a monster who smiles like a man. But even as she thought it, another truth crept in, the way he had caught her in the hall. He could have hurt her. He could have silenced her forever. Instead, he had only whispered, "And yet you're still here." She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. That was when the lights cut out. The room plunged into blackness. Her heart stuttered. The storm outside rumbled. But this wasn't just a power surge. The silence was too sharp, too deliberate. Then she heard it, shouts. From outside. From the hallway. Her stomach dropped. The door burst open, and a guard stumbled in, blood dripping down his temple. "Miss Blakes," he gasped, clutching his side. Stay down." Before she could react, gunfire cracked in the distance. Sharp, deafening, echoing through the halls. Samantha's entire body froze. This wasn't the sleek, suffocating control of Jong-suk's world. This was chaos. The guard shoved her toward the far wall. "Hide!" But before she could move, another figure appeared in the doorway. Not one of Jong-suk's men. This man's face was covered by a black mask, his gun raised. His eyes locked on her like prey. Samantha's scream ripped through her throat, and then, in a blur, he was there. Jong-suk. He moved faster than her mind could register, his suit jacket whipping behind him as he stepped into the doorway. His gun barked once, twice, clean, precise. The masked man collapsed, blood spreading across the floor. Samantha clapped her hands over her mouth, trembling violently. Jong-suk didn't look at her. Not yet. He scanned the hall, his movements sharp, controlled, like a predator in his element. He gave rapid orders in Korean, his men snapping into formation around him. Only when the hall was secured did he turn back to her. His eyes burned, not with coldness, but with fire. "Are you hurt?" His voice was clipped, but there was something beneath it, a strain she hadn't heard before. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. He crossed the room in 3 strides and seized her face between his hands, tilting it up toward him. His touch was firm, searching, as though needing proof she was whole. "You will not leave my side," he said fiercely, each word a command carved into stone. "Do you understand?" She nodded frantically, too stunned to speak. Gunfire still echoed distantly in the mansion, but here, in the storm of his presence, she felt something she hadn't expected. Safe. Terrified, yes, but safe. Jong-suk released her just enough to draw his gun again, his arms sliding protectively in front of her as he guided her out of the room. His men flanked them, but it was him she clung to, him she followed. They moved through shadowed corridors, the air thick with smoke and the metallic sting of blood. The storm outside wailed against the windows. At one turn, another masked man lunged from the darkness. Samantha screamed, but Jong-suk was faster. He slammed the attacker into the wall with brutal precision, his blade flashing once, clean and merciless. The body crumpled. For a heartbeat, silence. Then Jong-suk's hand found hers. He pulled her close, his grip unyielding, his voice a low growl against the chaos. "No one touches what's mine." Her heart stumbled violently in her chest, because in that moment, surrounded by blood, by violence, by everything she should have hated. She believed him. And she wasn't sure she wanted anyone else to. The mansion smelled of wet earth and gunpowder for days afterward. Even when the last of the attackers had been dragged away. Blood on carpets, men ushered into dark rooms. Some residue of violence clung to the rooms like a second skin. Guards wiped floors until their forearms ached. Men in suits argued in low, clipped voices in hallways. But the heart of the house beat steady and unshakable. Jong Suk's presence, iron calm and exacting, had not faltered. Samantha sat on the edge of a sofa in the same room where she had first been made to kneel, hands hugging her knees. The wound in her chest from fear had not closed. Instead, it had split open into a complicated, raw ache. She found herself replaying the night on an endless loop. The masked men, the black van, the first shot that pierced the quiet, Jong Suk's movements like lightning. So sudden, so lethal. Then him catching her face, asking if she was whole. Now, in the sterile quiet of day, she wanted to tear open every secret. She wanted to be furious. She wanted to be free. He entered without knocking. He never knocked. He never needed to. Jong Suk looked smaller in daylight, the shadows smoothing some of his edges. The suit he wore was still perfect, his hair still immaculate. But the set of his jaw this morning carried a new weight, something tired, perhaps, or simply human. He moved with the same composure that always made her feel scrutinized. But today there was an extra tremor at the corner of his mouth that she had never seen before. Why did it happen? She demanded the second he sat, unable to keep the question from her voice. Came out raw, threaded with terror and anger. Who were they? Who wanted me dead? For a moment he said nothing. He did not look surprised by the question. It was as though he had expected it, planned for it. He stared at his hands, at the glass of untouched whiskey on the low table between them, and finally lifted his eyes to hers. Enemies, he said simply. The single word was a flat stone landing in still water. People who would hurt me indirectly to get to me directly. Samantha let out a breath that trembled with nerves. But why me? I kissed you, yes. Panicked. She flailed for the word and found none. I'm a marketing manager from Chicago. I don't know your enemies. You were an access point, he said, matter of fact. And more importantly, he added, voice softening until it felt almost private. You were near. She stared at him. The explanation was too clean and too hollow at once. Access point? She echoed. I'm not an informant. I don't know your business. No, he agreed. You didn't. That's what made you useful and dangerous. He paused. They assumed you were connected to someone who might have been a liability. They hoped your presence would force a reaction. Samantha's head swam. They almost killed me because they thought I'd make you react. The words tasted like ash. Because of me. He did not deny it. He only closed his eyes for a beat. When he opened them, there was a softness she had never seen before. An exhausted, unreadable thing. If you had been hurt, he said quietly, I would have had to answer for it. Samantha's fist clenched. Answer how? With bullets? With vengeance. Her voice rose without her meaning it to. You say you protect people, but you kidnap them, you hurt them emotionally, you trap them in gold cages, and you call it protection. Jong Suk's gaze hardened. The cool, dangerous mask slipped for the merest second, and she caught the ghost of something else. Hurt. Regret. He breathed out and ran a hand across the bridge of his nose in a tiny human gesture. You don't get to reduce what I am to a single line, he said quietly. There are things you cannot understand about the world I run and the choices I make. Then explain one to me. Samantha shot back. Explain why you had me held, blindfolded, treated like property. Explain why you think that's love. His jaw worked. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked flawed. Because I felt you, he said. The confession arrived with no fanfare, only the bluntness of someone naming a wound. Because after you left that night, I could not stop thinking about the way you dared me. I was angry, intrigued. I wanted to know who would be so insolent as to steal a moment like that from me as if my life were a stage show. I wanted, He stopped and searched for a surrogate word. To possess the answer. Samantha's pulse jumped. Possessive. The word slid between them like a shard. Possession without consent. Possession used as armor against the unknown. So you took me, she said, because you wanted answers. Because your ego was bruised. He flinched as if struck. It was not only that. There was a hard swallow. I am not naive about my fault in what happened. I believed I could keep you safe while I learned. I misjudged what mood my world would take against you. Samantha wanted to be furious. She forced a scowl. But the fabric of the moment shifted again when he stood, walked to the window, and placed his palm on the glass. Outside, the estate's gardens were a green blur. Beyond them, the city went on, unknowing. He spoke then in a softer voice, almost as if addressing himself. There are men in my life, he said slowly, who made choices like mine in the past, who thought they could bend fate in their favor. They broke people. They broke themselves. I have watched the cycles. I know the cost. And still I made the choice to bring you here. Samantha's anger curdled into something like pity and disgust. So you think you're different? She asked. That makes you a better monster? He turned, and for a single, unguarded second his facade cracked completely. The mask slipped and the man underneath blinked at her, raw-muscled and real. I'm broken, he admitted, the admission almost a whisper. I am a man who has learned to rule through fear because it is the only certainty I have. I do not trust softness, because softness has always been used against me. The words landed strange and foreign in Samantha's ears. For all the monstrous things he had done, for all the cruelty he could summon, here was a man haunted by an emptiness she could not imagine. You're lonely, she said before she could stop herself, surprised at how gentle the statement sounded. You think you're invincible, but you're hollow. He laughed then, a single sound that carried both mirth and sorrow. Lonely, he echoed. That would be a neat label, Samantha, but loneliness suggests a desire to be joined. I don't allow that. At least I didn't. He paused, eyes sharpening. Until you. Samantha felt it then, that electric vulnerability transforming into something frighteningly intimate. To have the leader of a criminal empire admit such a small human weakness to her, someone he'd kidnapped, was almost obscene in its intimacy. You could walk away, she said, the sentence floating between them awkward and dangerous. Leave me be. Walk away from this life and I'll leave Korea. I'll disappear. He turned his head slowly. A shadow crossed his face at the suggestion. I am a man who cannot stop what I am, he said simply. There are threads I am woven into. If I walked away, they would unravel painfully at someone else's hands. They would unravel at yours. His gaze found hers with a steadiness that stole breath. And I will not allow you to pay for my past. She searched his face for manipulation. She expected the practiced cruelty, the subtle coercion that had laced their days, but in that moment his expression was unadorned and true. The name of the feeling that pulsed between them was not clear. Mercy, perhaps, or ownership that had shifted toward care. But it left Samantha dizzy and unmoored. A servant entered with tea then and unconsciously broke the spell. The tray clinked. The ordinary clattered back into place. Jong-suk slid into the seat across from her, as though the last confession had never occurred, and offered her the cup. Why didn't you tell me? She asked suddenly, the question that had been simmering since the first night she'd been locked in that room. Why not tell me who you are? Why keep everything hidden? He met her stare without flinching. Because the truth would have made you run, he said. And my world is not kind to the ones who flee. He folded his hands together like a man containing an impulse. I have not always been a ruler out of malice. I was forged by necessity. That does not excuse what I have done to you, Samantha. I am sorry. The apology was small, tasted incomplete, but it was something. For the first time, she realized that under his cruelty there existed a man capable of regret. That realization was dangerous, like finding a crack in a rock and seeing a seed take root. Why me? She asked finally. Not because she wanted the truth, She half suspected it might sting too much, but because she wanted to know the shape of the thing that had chosen her. His eyes softened and darkened at once. Because you were the only person who treated me as a man rather than a myth, he said. You didn't grovel. You didn't bend. You kissed me like a defiant thing. And I have not had such defiance in my life for a long time. She wanted to be offended, to recoil at his language of possession disguised as praise. Instead, she found herself turning the words over like a coin in her palm, wondering at their edges. Outside, the city pulsed on, indifferent to their private reckoning. Inside, the mansion held both of them in its heavy quiet. Two people orbiting the same danger, drawn to each other by threads neither fully controlled. Samantha rose then, pacing like a caged animal. I don't know how this ends, she said brutally. You don't get to make the rules for me. You will never be free in my sense, he replied, voice even. But you will be safe under my hand. That is the bargain. And if I say no? Her voice now was small but fierce. You will say no, but you will learn that in my world, nothing is purely a choice, he answered. Yet even as he spoke, he reached out and, almost gently, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, an intimate action that made her stomach drop. I could force you into obedience. I could make you fear me, but I would rather have your will bend willingly, less broken that way. It was a terrifying admission of methods and motives. Coercion dressed as care, domination softened into seduction. Samantha's insides clenched. She thought of her father's steady smile in Chicago, of the small acts of ordinary love she had left behind. She thought of the woman she had been before Gangnam, before van tires shrieking in the night and the scent of gunpowder in her hair. Don't mistake me for someone who will submit, she said, steadier than she felt. I don't belong in your world. You never did, he said, which is why I think you already belong with me. The words landed like a dare. And for the first time, Samantha couldn't tell whether she hated him more or hated that she might, terrifyingly, believe him. Days slipped into a strange routine. Samantha rose each morning, moved through the days like someone moving through a dream. Jong-suk had not lied about one thing. She was safe here insofar as he defined safety. No one touched her. No one asked trills of invasive questions about her life beyond a thin policy of irrelevance. But safety, under his definition, arrived tethered to control. Once, in the golden lull of late afternoon, she found herself in the library. Jong-suk entered without preamble and sat across the low table, not touching her but occupying enough space to make her pulse quicken. Why are you here alone? He asked. I was escaping dinner, she replied. Not auditioning to be the cause of your nightly musings. He smiled, small and brittle. Perhaps you underestimate how boring my life has become without you. Then, after a beat, do you feel anger? At me? I don't have an answer for that. She stood and left him, heading back to her room. Samantha stomped up to her room. He followed her there, unbidden, closing the distance between them in ways the world outside would have called intimate. You asked me to trust you, she said, breathing hard. But trust is built on truth. You want my obedience without the truth. And yet, he replied, voice steady, I have shown you enough to understand you are not safe in the open world. Not for the reasons you imagine. What reasons do I imagine? She snapped. You think it was random, he said. You do not understand the web. They batted phrases like weapons until the fight dissolved into something rawer. Exhaustion. They collapsed into a silence saturated with all the things they had not said. His hand found hers across the armrest of the couch. It was not a possessive touch. It was a reaching out touch. Her fingers twined with his slowly, as if mapping an old ache. He looked at her as if measuring the distance between them. Then, with a sudden motion that made her breath catch, he leaned in. The kiss he pressed to her lips was not the first she'd shared with him. But it was different. Softer, claiming, without the theatrical cruelty of the barroom pretense. It sought permission but also took for itself an answer. Samantha did not pull away. They both stopped after a long second, foreheads touching, breaths mingled. The world narrowed to the faint tick of the clock and the thud of her heart. I won't make you a prisoner of submission, he murmured. But I will not let you go to those who would use you as a weapon against me. She pulled back enough to look straight into his eyes. And if I asked you to let me go? He swallowed. The fight between ruler and man was raw on his face. I would tell you no, he said softly. But then I'd show you all the reasons to stay. A tear cut cleanly down her cheek then, making a hot trail. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, embarrassed. This is not the life I wanted. Nor mine, he said. But some nights, at least, you let me feel like maybe there is something that resembles it. It was a terrible, honest sentence. It landed between them like an offering and a threat. Few days later, a call shattered their peace again. They had her father in Chicago. Samantha sat strapped into a leather seat of the jet, her hands locked together so tightly her knuckles ached. Outside, the clouds blurred past in silver streaks, but her mind was on one thing only. The photo of her father, coffee cup cooling in his hand, eyes heavy with resignation. She couldn't stop replaying the image. Every time she blinked, she saw it burned onto her eyelids. Jong Suk sat across from her, suit not creased despite the hours, his face locked in thought. He had been speaking in clipped Korean on encrypted calls since they left Seoul, his voice a blade that cut through panic. Now, though, he looked at her. I told you I'd keep you safe, he said. His tone was iron, but his eyes softened. I didn't realize they would reach so far. Samantha's throat tightened. You don't get it. My father's not a soldier. He's a history professor in Chicago. He's ordinary. Which is why they think he's a leverage, Jong Suk said simply. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We will take him back, whole, or I burn their entire operation from Seoul to Illinois. She wanted to hate his confidence, to tell him not everything could be solved with fire and blood. But at that moment, she needed to believe him. When the plane touched down, the Chicago night smelled of rain and oil, an odd comfort. Samantha hadn't been home in years, but the city lights clawed at her heart with memories. Jong Suk's men moved like shadows through the airport, invisible yet everywhere. She was ushered into an SUV, her pulse beating in her throat. The location came in a coded message, an abandoned warehouse on the south side. Predictable. Samantha felt sick. They arrived in silence. Jong Suk's soldiers fanned out, weapons ready. He glanced at her once before stepping into the dark building. Inside, her father sat tied to a chair, a bruise darkening his temple. His eyes lifted, and when they found her, Samantha nearly collapsed. Sam! His voice cracked. Baby girl. Her breath tore free like a sob. Dad! But before she could run to him, the shadows moved. Men emerged, hard-eyed, American armed. Rival mafia using her father like a pawn. The standoff snapped tight. Guns raised. Tension humming like a live wire. You came fast, Suk. One of them sneered. So predictable. We take the girl, we take the father, and you. They didn't finish. Jong Suk moved first. Chaos exploded. Gunfire shredded the silence, ricocheting off rusted beams. Samantha dropped to the ground, hands over her head. She saw Jong Suk moving like a storm, precise, lethal, every bullet an answer to their threats. He was ruthless, but it wasn't cruelty. It was protection weaponized. Her father was pulled behind cover by one of Jong Suk's men. Samantha crawled toward them, her breath ragged. By the time it ended, the warehouse reeked of gunpowder. Jong Suk stood in the center, chest heaving, blood staining his sleeve, eyes scanning for her. When they found her, relief crashed across his face so raw it broke her. It's done, he said simply. His voice shook. He's safe. You're safe. And then he collapsed to one knee, the blood loss finally catching him. Jong Suk! Samantha screamed, rushing to his side. His hand caught hers, iron strong even in weakness. I told you, he murmured, eyes closing. I would burn them all for you. The hospital smelled of antiseptic. Samantha paced the hallway, fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. Her father sat beside her, pale but alive, whispering reassurances that felt paper-thin. "He saved me," her father said softly, his academic voice steady despite the bruise on his face. "That man. He walked into hell and saved me." Samantha swallowed, throat aching. "He's not a good man, Dad. He's dangerous." Her father looked at her, gaze piercing. "Dangerous doesn't erase what he chose tonight. People are made of contradictions. Sometimes the ones who've walked through fire know best how to protect who they love." The words lodged deep in her chest. When she was finally allowed into Jong-suk's room, she found him pale against the white sheets, machines steady at his bedside. He opened his eyes when she touched his hand. "You should have stayed in Seoul," she whispered, tears threatening. "You nearly died here." His lips curved faintly. "If I died saving him, I'd still win." "You're insane," she said, voice breaking. "Maybe," he admitted. His hand tightened on hers. "But you're the only thing that makes me want to be sane." Her heart shattered and mended in the same beat. A week later, when his body had begun to heal, they sat together in a quiet garden outside the hospital. Chicago sunlight painted his face softer than Samantha had ever seen. "I can't go back to Seoul and pretend," she said, voice trembling. "I can't unsee who you are, what you've done. But I also can't unfeel what's between us." He studied her, his dark eyes a storm of contradictions. "I will never be ordinary," he said. "I will always have blood on my hands. But for you, Samantha Blakes, I would try." She shook her head, a tear sliding free. "You don't have to try to be ordinary. You just have to try to be honest. With me." Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Then he leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "I love you," Jong-suk said, the words like iron turned molten. "Not as possession, not as power. As the only person who saw me and didn't flinch." Samantha's breath caught. She had waited, fought, and feared these words. And now that they were here, they undid her completely. "I love you too," she whispered, "even though it terrifies me." Their kiss then was not frantic or forced. It was steady, sealing, a vow made not with rings or contracts but with breath and closeness. Months later, the spring rains had ended, leaving Seoul washed clean. Samantha stood in front of a mirror, the ivory silk of her wedding gown hugging her frame, her curls pinned in soft waves, pearls glinting at her ears. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Stronger, steadier, glowing with a certainty she hadn't known she was capable of. The ceremony was small, private, almost secretive. Jong-suk had enemies everywhere, but today, he stood in a quiet garden, dressed in a perfectly cut black suit, his hair brushed back, his eyes locked on Samantha as though she were the only person alive. His men stood at the perimeter, invisible to the guests but vigilant as ever. When she walked toward him, the world seemed to hold its breath. For once, Jong-suk wasn't the mafia leader who commanded empires in the shadows. He was just a man. One who looked at her as if she were sunlight he'd never thought he'd see. "I vow," he said in a low, rough voice that carried to every corner, "to never let fear or power be stronger than what I feel for you. You are the only thing I cannot live without. My wife, my heart, my home." Samantha's tears glistened as she whispered, "And I vow to stand beside you, even in the shadows, because love isn't about escaping the dark. It's about finding the light together." When their lips met, the applause was quiet but heartfelt. In that moment, even the shadows seemed to step back. Marriage didn't make Jong-suk less dangerous, but it changed the way he carried that danger. His empire still demanded his presence. Negotiations, rivalries, quiet wars fought in alleys and boardrooms alike. But now he came home differently. Samantha would be at her desk, reviewing manuscripts for the publishing firm she had restarted with his financial backing. Her dream, once suffocated, had been given room to breathe. She handled authors from around the world, championing voices that had been overlooked. Jong-suk never interfered, but he always listened when she shared her victories and frustrations. On their anniversary, Samantha walked hand in hand with Jong-suk along the Han River, their child asleep in a stroller before them. A little girl, with her mother's eyes and her father's steady, unreadable gaze even in dreams. Jong-suk carried none of his usual guards tonight. For once, he was simply a man with his family, the shadows at bay. Samantha looked at him, her heart swelling. "Did you ever think this would be your life?" she asked softly. He glanced at her, then at the child, then back at the water. "No," he admitted. "I thought my life would end in fire, not in peace." He tightened his hand on hers. "But then you kissed me." She laughed through tears, leaning against him. "Best mistake I ever made." He smiled. Not the sharp smile of the Mafia king, but the quiet, unguarded smile of a man finally at home. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please give us a comment, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also click on the notification icon so that you will get notified every time we make a new story.